Hi everyone, I'm Ashley from the blog Sewrella here with Lion Brand, and today we're going to be learning how to make this awesome crochet color pooling scarf. Now we're going to learn the entire process start to finish of how to make this argyle look to the crochet color pooling, and it's really easy. All you need to know are chain stitch and a single crochet, and you'll be able to make this awesome scarf too. We're going to be using some Lion Brand Color Waves yarn in a beautiful variegated shade. And this is a brand new yarn from Lion Brand. It's really luxurious, really soft, and I love it. Let's go ahead and get started.
So here are my two samples using Lion Brand Color Waves yarn. I went ahead and worked up two different colorways that I know work. This one here is the one that is in my scarf, and we can see kind of the argyle pattern here converging and then diverging, just creating kind of X's in these different colors. And then this one, the rainbow, Color Waves Rainbow, comes in and out a little differently, and I think that was an issue with tension. But as we get into this, I want to first tell you all about this yarn. It is made by Lion Brand, and it is called Color Waves, and it's one of their newer yarns. It's a level 3 weight, and we can see all the beautiful colors in this here. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this one that I used for my scarf. And this one is called Playground. So again, it's Color Waves. This is the only Lion Brand yarn that I could get to work with color pooling. And as you can see, it's nice and squishy and soft. It's got all these beautiful colors in it. I love this yarn. I loved working with it. Beautiful, awesome yarn, level 3 weight again. And it recommends an H or 5mm hook. So that is what I used. I've got my Clover Amour hook here. I love these. And I used that, just the hook size recommended. So no matter what yarn you're using, you want to use the hook size recommended on your yarn label. So let's take a look at this yarn. It is so squishy and soft and wonderful, and we can see all the colors here. So if we look at this kind of argyle pattern that the work makes, obviously I'm holding it horizontally, and that there on the right is the foundation chain, and you work upward that way. In rows back and forth. Color pooling will not work in the round. So this yarn here is just perfect for color pooling. It has the right amount of color changes, and when choosing your yarn, you want to look at these color changes here. And you want to make sure that your color changes are not too long and not too short. You want them to be somewhere between about 10 and 12 inches for each color change. So if we look at this Color Waves yarn here, we look at, okay, there is our color change. It goes from dark green to light green. Now I'm holding my finger there and I'm looking for the next color change. Here where it goes from green to orange, that is our light green color. That is how long our light green is. And I used my ruler when I first looked at this yarn, and it was about 10 inches. Now let's look at this orange. Again, it's a very similar size. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, and we'll go over how to adjust if your colors aren't exactly equal. But here we can see that all of these colors are about the same length, and it's the perfect length for color pooling. I'll show you in a few moments some yarns that are not great for color pooling and why. But here we can see that these color changes are all very even. It also, notice, goes from one color to the next very abruptly. Now that's a good thing. I know in crochet a lot of the time those abrupt color changes are not our favorite, but this yarn is perfect. So, and this one again is called Playground. So this Lion Brand Color Waves yarn is absolutely beautiful and creates just such a beautiful, lovely argyle look. And I will be going over in just a few moments how to start to finish get this pooling to work. But first I want to go over other yarn choices with you for just a moment. So here is the other Color Waves yarn that I was able to get to do the pooling. This one is Color Waves in Rainbow. And I tried several different Color Waves yarns. These two colorways, Rainbow and Playground, worked out the best for me. So if you want to get Lion Brand yarn for this argyle, V shape kind of color pulling method, make sure to stick to those two colorways because I can tell you for sure they will work if you're following my directions, rainbow and playground. And again, this one recommends an H size hook, so we're going to go ahead and use an H for that one. And that's what I used on my sample here. And you see that these yarn lengths are going to be pretty similar to the playground colorway. So if we look at these, we have our hot pink here, again 10 to 12 inches give or take. Our bright orange, now that one's a little bit longer, but that's fine. We're going to be able to adjust and work with that just perfectly. Looking at the yellow and then green and blue, these color changes are absolutely perfect. So this would make a great color pooling yarn to work with. Now when choosing yarns, you want to be absolutely sure before you start to try pooling that your color changes are as I've shown here and are not a bunch of short color changes or a bunch of really long color changes or some mixture of the two. You want this 10 or 12 length color in your variegated yarn in order for it to pool how we would like it to. Any other kind of variegated yarn with really short or really long color changes won't work. So there is the sample for rainbow, and now we're going to go over some other Color Waves yarn. So this one here is another Color Waves yarn, and we can see that the variegation looks a little bit different. It looks a little bit more kind of marbled. And let's take a look at these color changes and look at our color change length. So we can see already that our first color we see is this purple, and that is very short. That's about 5 inches. Then we have this kind of creamy color, which is a tad longer, but still pretty short. We go back to purple, it's kind of a light purple, dark purple, creamy mixture here for maybe 4 inches, which is way too short. And then we have a pretty long piece of dark blue moving into lighter blue, moving into purple, and it's kind of hard to tell what the color changes are, where they start and stop, and our color changes are very, very, very uneven, and a lot of them are very short. So although this yarn is beautiful, and I am definitely going to hang on to it for a different project, look at this color change, by the way, super long compared to those really, really short little purple spots. So this yarn is not the best for planned pooling. Although it's beautiful and I love it, and this yarn will make for a great project, it does not have the color changes we need. Now looking at the skein itself before you unravel it, look at these kind of blocks of stripes of color. You can see the same color goes for a couple of rows, a couple of strands of yarn, and in this one, even just looking at the skein, you can see that the color changes happen very often. We're only seeing maybe one row of a color, or we're seeing the color change even within that skein really, really quickly. We don't even have to unravel this yarn and take a better look at it. We can tell that that one is way too marbled, whereas the rainbow is going to give us a much better look, even just looking at the skein itself. So if you're in the store and you're looking at yarns, take a look at the skein. So this one is another Color Waves yarn. This one is Tiger's Eye. And these colors are beautiful. It's a beautiful neutral tan and camel and kind of charcoal look. It's a great, great yarn. And I'm wondering if it will do well with color pooling. It looks like it will because we see several strands of those colors. It looks like they have good long color changes. Here's our first color. That looks like the right length. We're looking good so far. It's not too short, not too long. Our next color is this camel. We're looking good. The next color is a tan. And then the next color goes back and repeats. So it goes ahead and repeats with this charcoal, and then camel, and then tan. So you can pull this yarn, the Tiger's Eye, but I will tell you that you will need to double the length of your starting chain. So you will need 2 repeats of the color sequence itself, and you'll know what I'm talking about in just a moment. So moving on from Color Waves, I wanted to give you an example of a yarn that also unfortunately will not work, the Lion Brand ice cream yarn. I love this yarn. I do have a super special project coming up early next year with this yarn. But if we look at the variegation, we can see that there are lots and lots of strands in one color. And especially if we pull this label off, we can see that it stays one color for a really, really, really long time before it changes. And that unfortunately means it won't pull. So here we are with our sample. Let's get into this color pooling and looking at what it means to color pool. So I am not changing colors at all. I am using the Lion Brand Color Waves yarn as it is made. I'm not altering it or cutting it or anything like that to create this awesome pooling effect. When I say color pooling, that means that the variegated yarn, when stitched a certain way, is just going to naturally lay out this argyle pattern when we stitch it correctly. So going ahead and getting started, we're going to make a slip knot. Go ahead and identify that very first color. So I made my slip knot right between that green and our kind of cantaloupe orangey color. And I'm going ahead and chaining. Now, I'm not going to tell you how many chains I start with. With a lot of color pooling techniques and tutorials, you'll see they'll tell you a kind of yarn and a certain number of chains to start with and a certain hook size, and you'll try all of that and it still won't work. Now, with this method that I'm going to teach you, you should be able to make color pooling work with any yarn that you know will pool, that someone else has gotten approved to pool. So if you get Lion Brand Color Waves yarn in Playground and you follow this technique, you will be able to pool your yarn. So the way that I'm doing this is first you need to chain through all of your color changes. So we're going to call it a color sequence. So what this means is I started on our cantaloupe orangey color because that was the first color change I saw. Granted, the yarn started in green at the very end, but we don't want to start with that light green because we don't know how long the green should have gone. So we want to start with the next color we see, and we're just going to keep chaining until we see that orange pop back up. So that means that we have gone through an entire color sequence. Now mine went through, let's see, about 6 different colors. And here we are, we now have all 6 colors in order, looking all nice and neat, and I have all of these chains here, and we can see that the next thing up on my hook is that cantaloupe orange color. So I've now chained through the entire color sequence successfully and gone right up to that color change from green to orange, which is where I started. So we now have all 6 colors chained out. Now we're not going to use this entire chain, but that's okay. We're going to proceed and start actually making our stitches. So we need to identify the 4th chain from our hook, 3 and 4, that is our 4th chain. We're going to single crochet into that 4th chain from our hook, and then we're going to chain 1, and you're going to skip 1 chain, and then single crochet in the next, and then chain 1. So here we can see how that edge should be looking now, all nice and even. We're going to skip 1 chain and single crochet, and then chain 1. And we're just going to repeat that for as long as it takes to work back through all of our color sequence. So until we see that orange yarn pop back up. Now it won't take you as long as your chain is to get back through the color sequence. We will have some extra chains that we need to take care of later on when the project wraps up, but just don't worry about that for now. Just keep going ahead with your single crochet, skip 1, and chain 1. Now the single crochet, chain 1, skip 1 is called the moss stitch or the granite stitch. You may be familiar with it already, but if you're not, it's a great stitch to have in your arsenal and it's a lot of fun, and it is the only stitch that you will be able to make your yarn pool with. So make sure that you are working every single crochet, every chain 1, and every skip 1 exactly the same. So here we are, I'm just working back down my chain and being careful to keep my tension the same. So for a moment here, I want to talk to you about tension. Tension is extremely, extremely important with color pooling. Now, one of my biggest downfalls is my tension. I do not have perfectly even tension. I have not been crocheting for 50 years, and I do not have perfectly even tension every single time that I make a stitch. So, but that's fine. I got my yarn to pool just fine while being consciously aware of keeping my tension even. If your tension is off, it will, creating some stitches tighter and some stitches looser will make your pooling or your argyle pattern kind of go askew, and it won't pool perfectly. But I will show you in just a few minutes how to correct this if your tension is off at all. So here we are back to our orange color, and you can see that we've worked our moss stitch or granite stitch all the way through all 6 colors in our color scheme. And we have these extra chains here, and we're just going to worry about those later. Don't worry about working in them now, just kind of get them down and out of the way. So now this is where we're going to be working off of for our pooling sample or our scarf. We have all of the colors here represented, but we need to take out a couple of stitches. So if you look at my pooling sample here, you can see that the stitches don't line up perfectly on top of each other. They go diagonally if you look at color-wise. So if we look at one color itself, like this blue, you can see that it goes diagonally. You can see that the blue stitches do not line up in perfect rows going vertically. They kind of skip over with each row. So if we look at these 3 blue stitches here, if you move straight up and over one, you can see that those 3 blue stitches are still there. They're just kind of skipping over a beat, and it carries on this way all the way throughout the work. And with all of the colors, if we look at this hot pink here, it kind of skips over and skips over and skips over. And that is what creates the argyle pattern, is this skipping over one and creating that diagonal. So in order to prevent this from creating straight lines of perfect colors, we want it to go diagonally. So we need to get our initial stitches one set off. So pull out 1 single crochet and 1 chain 1 so that you will be 1 set of stitches off. And now we're going to chain 2 and we're going to turn our work. So go ahead and turn your little strip here over, and we're just going to single crochet in between those 2 single crochets in your chain space, single crochet and then chain 1. And we're just going to continue with that moss or granite stitch all the way back down. So you're working into the chain 1 space, not into a specific stitch. Always single crocheting and then chaining 1. And we're just going to work all the way back down. Now on this second row, you will not be able to see the pooling yet. So don't get discouraged if you don't see a beautiful argyle pattern appear. You will not be able to see it just yet, but that is fine. We will start to see it on the 3rd row and even more so thereafter. So be a little bit patient, work this 2nd row without really any payoff, and then once we get to the 3rd row, we'll really start to see a little bit of movement. But as you go along, this project is just even more satisfying as you see those diagonals and that argyle really take shape, and it is just probably one of the most satisfying projects that I have ever worked on. It is just so rewarding to see something appear before your eyes just from a variegated yarn and your hook. It's really quite amazing. So here we are just working back. So here we have row 2 almost done. We're just going to work in this last stitch here. We've done our last, next to last single crochet. We've chained 1, and now we're going to work our last single crochet into that chain 4 from the very beginning. So that is row 2 completed. Now we're going to chain up 2 and turn our work. And now looking at this, we will be able to see a little bit of pooling happening here in row 3. So we're going to go ahead and single crochet in the first chain space, chain 1, single crochet and chain 1. Now you want to start looking at the work in terms of colors of stitches and where they line up. Now they won't line up each row in order. They will line up with the row rows below. So row 3 will line up with row 1, or shouldn't line up, I should say, because here we can see the pinks are lying diagonally. Our first pink stitch in row 3 is not over another pink stitch, it is over an orange stitch. So go ahead and keep going here. We can see again that it's starting to pool because this is our first purple stitch in row 3, and it is just like the pinks here, lying diagonally from the first purple stitch in row 1. So this is looking perfect. It's not lying perfectly one on top of the other. Rows 1 and 3 should not be matching as far as the colors lying where they should. Now again, it's very important to go ahead and keep even tension as best you can from here on out. If you feel yourself relaxing a bit more than you usually would with looser stitches or than when you first started the project, go ahead and tighten back up, or if you are crocheting too tightly, if you're stressed or are worried about it pooling, just try and take a step back and relax. This is a fun project and there's no pressure to get it right on the first try. So definitely just go ahead and relax, let your hands do what they would normally do, and just make your stitches as you normally would. The more tension you have held in your hands, the tighter your work will come out, and if you relax later on, your pooling will be way off. So I'm just finishing up row 3 here, and we'll take a look at it in just a moment. And I'm going to chain up 2. So now let's look at this work. Here we can see our first oranges are skipping over, our pinks and our purples are skipping over, our blues are skipping over, our green, our dark green is skipping over, and our light green is skipping over. Now sometimes it'll skip over by 1 and sometimes it'll skip over by 2. If it's ever skipping over more than 2, or more colors are skipping over consecutively twice or more than twice, instead of just skipping over the 1, then we will need to correct that, which I'll go over in a moment. Now looking at our sample here, if we look at these light greens, sometimes it goes up 1 and then over, so it does stack up for a row or 2, but sometimes the colors, being that they aren't perfectly even, just like this cantaloupe here, we can see that it's kind of a straight line for a tad bit there. It doesn't have to perfectly skip over once. Every color doesn't have to skip over once. As long as it's not lining up perfectly over and over and over again, you will get the argyle look. So don't get hung up on every color skipping over only once every single row, because I got the argyle pattern to look great, and it wasn't always exactly one skip over. So as we can see with this light green, we can see that sometimes it skips over more than once. So here we are going on to row 4, and now with row 4, this should pool with row 2. So always look 2 rows below to see if your yarn is pooling correctly. So here we are just stitching along. For the entire project, you will be doing that moss stitch of single crochet 1, chain 1. So there's no need to worry about what stitches you're going to do or counting or anything like that. Really, we just want to pay attention to our colors and our pooling, and that's really all you have to worry about, which I love about this project. I'm not a huge fan of counting stitches. I do it because I have to. So with a project like this where I can just look at the work and assess how it's going and make sure that everything is going correctly just by glancing at it, that is a project I love. So you're just going to keep continuing on with our moss or granite stitch here all the way down. And if we look at our work, we can see that the cantaloupe is lining up nicely, and then our hot pink is skipping over a little bit. So we can see here that this blue is coming up way too early. We don't want it to come up that early, because if we look 2 rows below, that blue is way over. And look at this pink. Our pink is coming up way too early. So I know that I've relaxed a little bit, my stitches have gotten looser, and thus used up more yarn. So if you're using up those colors faster, they will pop up too early. So if you're looking 2 rows below, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up my stitches a little bit. My first couple of rows always tend to be tighter. Now that's just me. Everyone is going to be individually very different. How they crochet in general, how you hold your hook plays a factor, and how your tension definitely plays a factor. That's why I don't give you an exact starting chain or anything like that. I don't give you a pattern necessarily, but more a technique to follow because everyone is going to be different. So here I always crochet pretty tightly on my first couple of rows while I'm getting the hang of things. I'm a little bit more tense, and then I loosen up as I get into it. But here you can see I loosened up too much and used up too much yarn. So I'm just tightening up, being a little bit aware. And you can see here now that I've done a few more rows. I've done 2 more sets of each of that odd and even row that should be matching up. And we can look at the colors here and see that I've kept a good eye on my tension, and these colors are skipping over nicely. So everything should be skipping over 1. So here we can see that it started out going one way and now it's coming back the other way a little bit. And that's fine with pooling. The very, very beginning is always going to be a little bit different. Here I've done a few more rows, and we can see that it's starting to converge and come in a little bit. It's lining up some, but we can see that these color changes are moving bit by bit. So this is looking good. It's looking very similar to the beginning of my sample here, my longer sample where you can really see the argyle pattern coming alive. Now, don't get discouraged if your first 10 or 15 rows aren't forming a beautiful argyle sort of thing just yet. On all of my samples that I've done, all 3 of these now, the first kind of 10 or 15 rows, especially in the center, looks kind of messy. And quite frankly, I don't know if that's me or if it's the yarn, but every time it works out as you go further along. So don't get discouraged if you don't see a perfect argyle pattern happening at first. Just go ahead and proceed with it as long as you're seeing those skip overs like you should and the colors are moving once in one direction or another. You should be good to go, and just go ahead and continue and you will see everything kind of fall into place. The very beginning might be a little bit more muddled or messy than later on. Later on, all of these V's and overlaps and all of that are lining up perfectly and it looks great, but the very beginning is a little bit messier. So I know if I were to continue with this sample that I've just started here with you guys, it would eventually turn into this argyle look here. So go ahead and continue on. You're just going to make that moss stitch every single row all the way until your piece is as long as you'd like it to be. And you should always have these centers of color here that you can see kind of come in and out and converge. It's going to look on the same on the front and back. And this is kind of what you're looking for. So go ahead and definitely reference back to this video as you go along and make sure that as you keep going, it does continue to create that argyle pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of these extra stitches. Now I'm just going to undo this slip knot. I'm just pulling it apart, and we're just going to basically like work this backwards and rip out these chains. So I just kind of take these out one at a time. It does take a little bit of wiggling, and it's a little time consuming to undo these stitches. You just kind of have to very carefully undo them and kind of take them back apart. And I use my hook a little bit to help me get in there. And you're just going to take the loose loop and just kind of pull at it and tug, and it'll come undone, and you just feed that tail back through. And you're going to do this all the way back up to where your yarn, where you started crocheting. So once you get back up that chain to where your work is, instead of pulling that loop out, you're just going to pull it tight into a knot, and you'll never know that you had extra stitches there. Now let's go over what to do if your pooling isn't lining up correctly. So here we can see that our pink is going great in a nice diagonal. And now 2 rows below the row that we're working on, we can see the color change goes from orange to pink. And then we have a couple of pink stitches here, and then it changes to purple. Now if we look at the row we're working on, it lines up perfectly with this orange here, and it skips over to pink, pink, and another pink. But now this is skipping over too long. So we want all of these stitches here that are purple to be moved over a bit because they're not lining up perfectly. We can see that the purple goes for too long. We only want the purple to go once over the blue, but you can see here that there are 2 purple stitches over blue. That should be changing to blue more quickly. So what we do in this situation is we want to use up more yarn. So we want to use up this purple before it turns to blue so that we can make this the correct number of stitches. And if we look back at this orange, we can look at the color change itself going from green to orange. It lines up perfectly. It's 1 stitch over. This kind of half orange, half pink is 1 stitch over. Our pink is 1 stitch over. And now we see that here is where we kind of get off. So you want to look at these stitches individually and identify where the problem is occurring. So the problem really isn't with our purple stitches. It's with our pink stitches, but it's pushing those purple stitches even further down the line. So pull it back to where your problem arises, and we're going to kind of cheat the system here. Instead of working a regular single crochet, go ahead and yarn over and insert your hook once again, and then yarn over and pull through all 4 loops on your hook. So start your single crochet but don't finish it off, and then yarn over and insert again, almost kind of like an increase. Now this is going to create a little bit fuller stitch, but it's going to look almost the same as all your other stitches, and with all of these itty bitty stitches in here and all these different colors, once your project is finished, you'll never be able to see that fuller stitch there. And now we can see that we've used up more of that pink yarn. It's changed to purple at the perfect moment. And now we're using this purple and going along. And let's see if it lines up correctly. We only want purple on top of 1 blue stitch. And look, now it's changed to blue and we have blue lining up 1 stitch over, just how we want it to. So by doing a little fudge here in this pink stitch, it has used up the extra pink yarn. That color change was probably just a little bit longer, which is just fine. Anytime that you notice your pooling is getting too long and you need a color to come up sooner, this is the trick to help you identify where it's moving too far over. Rip back to that stitch and then go ahead and do this kind of secret move. You don't have to adjust your tension for the whole row. You don't have to make a whole bunch of looser stitches to use up that yarn. Just go ahead and use this kind of little cheat stitch. I used it over and over and over in this project because my tension would kind of waver. I picked up this project at different times throughout the day in different situations, and my tension was a little bit different each time, so I noticed this problem coming up quite a bit, and this trick worked for me great. And you could see in the intro of this video, you can't tell that I cheated the system. Everything looks like it's lying perfectly, and this row finished out great. It all looks even, and the problem is fixed. So here I also want to talk to you guys a little bit about fixing when you need to change balls of yarn. So when we go from one skein to another, we can't just tie on where the yarn ends and where the next yarn begins, because it will mess up all of our color pooling work. So we can see that this starts with a little bit of the dark green and goes into light green. If we were to tie that on, it would completely mess up our color pooling, and we don't want that. So I'm going to take out a couple of stitches from the yarn that ran out, rip back to that color change, that last color change, which for me was purple going into blue. Now I'm going to take my new skein of yarn that I'm going to tie on, and I'm going to identify where it goes from purple to blue. So now that I see that exact same color change as with what my yarn that ran out is doing, we are going to tie our knot in exactly the same place. We're going to get it as close as we can, right on top of that color change. Now don't tie your knot purple to purple or yellow to yellow or whatever. in a random spot within the color change. You want to tie your knot right on the spot where your colors change, because if you do it in the middle of a color, you're not really guaranteed that you won't get too much of that color or not get enough of that color because of where you place your knot. So if you do it right here on the spot where your colors converge, you are sure to get a seamless color pooling effect even when you need to change skeins of yarn. And I had to change skeins of yarn twice for this scarf. I used 3 full skeins of the Color Waves yarn in Playground for my scarf that you saw at the beginning of this video. And it was the perfect length with 3 skeins. Nice, quick project, not very expensive. I didn't need a ton of yarn. But I did have to do this tying on a new skein twice. So you definitely want to be sure that you are tying it on in the right spot. And now I've trimmed my tails, and I'm just going to continue working around that knot. So definitely be careful not to work that knot into your work, kind of work around it, still making your chain and your single crochet just as you normally would. And we can see that now from the front of this work you cannot tell, and our blue skipped over just perfectly. You cannot tell at all that I tied on a new skein of yarn. It is lining up perfectly, and our color pooling is continuing to work. Now I'm just going to work back down this other end of the row and make sure everything's lining up perfectly. I do recommend that if you are planning on making a scarf with the Color Waves yarn, or any yarn for that matter, but especially Color Waves, do go ahead and order or pick up 3 skeins of the Color Waves yarn at the same time. You want to make sure that the pooling is the same in all of your skeins, so don't order 1 skein and see how it goes and then order more later. Go ahead and get the 3 skeins and have enough to make your whole scarf, just to make sure that the dye lots aren't any different depending on when you order. And just keep on going with this technique. So go ahead and continue on with your crochet color pooling in your beautiful Color Waves yarn, and you can make this entire scarf very easily and very quickly. I again used 3 skeins of Color Waves in Playground, so make sure to head over onto the Lion Brand website and pick up your Color Waves yarn. I also added a few pom-poms to the bottom of my scarf just to give it an even more playful kind of look for the season. This makes a great gift, so make it for someone special soon. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial.